A warm welcome to my viewers. In today's episode, I'll be joined by Nadeemah Docrat, who has her Master's in Urban Studies with a specialisation in sustainability and energy efficiency in cities. Together, we will explore the value of Indigenous knowledge as a tool for sustainable urban planning and development. So welcome, Nadeemah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Inéz.
Great. So to start off, I think it's important to give our viewers an understanding of what we mean when we say sustainability. So could you just provide a very brief definition of sustainability and its importance in the field of planning?
Sure thing. The audience needs to understand that the term and concept of sustainability is not new, but has been used since the 19th century by English farmers and was used to describe communities that were being supported by sustainable systems in achieving food self-reliance in rural communities. Presently, sustainability has become an important notion in subduing tensions between the aspirations of mankind and the limitations of said aspirations imposed by nature. It's derived off of three concepts, and these are key concepts such as development, need, and future generations, aiming at creating a balance between environmental, social, and economic pillars that drive our existence. Perfect harmony is achieved when all three pillars are balanced equally, but the importance that they all have on the working of society has become an important notion as privatization, capitalism, and consumerism continue to drive our lives at the cost of environmental balance. However, I do personally see sustainability as the ability in achieving balance to protect and conserve the natural environment and all that is encompassed within it. Severe criticism of this concept does exist due to the reinterpretation of the definition through the years and in various professions, which everyone is aware of, resulting in dimensional contradictions and in not fully understanding how it can be achieved from a policy perspective, as there isn't a concrete definition. Sustainability is important in urban planning, as it encourages the notion to improve the quality of life and welfare of cities by reinventing hard urban surfaces to be more aware and incorporative of the natural environment, and in doing so, creating healthier and more efficient spaces. It is essentially looking at creating a coexisting environment, natural environment, urban form and structure, economic and institutional processes within a city and or spaces. Nature is an important aspect in the city because of the natural health and psychosocial benefits that it brings into our daily life. Through the incorporation of nature into the city, it holds a fundamental premise of making cities and urban spaces more resilient, livable, and offers the stimulation of engagement between both the ecosystem integrity and public health. Everyone knows that the world has experienced increased urbanization and globalization since the onslaught of industrial revolution, and with it came the many negative environmental and health problems. Whilst it may seem that more people have realized the negative impact of climate change and the corresponding negative effects that it's had on the planet, a Living Planet report published by the World Wildlife Fund in 2020 relays extremely shocking decreasing statistics that has been experienced across the globe within various natural habitats and ecosystems. Not only has the world's oceans been polluted, but more than 75% of the Earth's ice-free land surface has been altered, and more than 85% of the wetlands have already been lost. The loss of ecosystems and biodiversity is not only an environmental issue, but dominoes down into developmental, economic, security, ethical, and moral loss experienced by all across the globe, and further undermines the ability to achieve most of the UN sustainability. It therefore becomes an issue of self-preservation, playing a critical role in providing the basic sustenance that all different organisms need for survival.
Sustainability is obviously something that's really, really integral in just our future as urban dwellers and the future of our cities and how we develop them. So I want to know how you became interested in sustainability, or what is it about sustainability that just pulled you in?
So I find sustainability interesting, and more so the environmental side, because I see it as a challenge that is waiting to be conquered. It is a multidisciplinary problem that integrates so many problems together and shows the interconnectedness that makes up any given space and of systems. So I focus more on environmental advocacy because it is a sphere of the city that has been and still continues to be forgotten and swept under the rug. Without having livable spaces with proper air quality and proper food sources, we would not be able to function properly. Whilst economic prosperity is important in the city, I do not see it as being the lifeline that we should be holding on to. Nature is. Even though policies and regulations exist that prioritize the natural environment, there is always some kind of a loophole that institutions find to continue to capitalize and economize and not really integrate with the natural environment. So by looking through the lens of sustainability, especially as a planner, it should allow one to see how different systems and spheres all interconnect with each other and the effects that it has on each other. There is no one thing that can be looked at from a singular view because it always has a level of interconnectedness with something else. You just need to find it, and that's the challenge. And that intrigues me is finding these challenges and finding these interconnected systems and seeing how do they all work with each other and how can we create these spaces where everything is interconnected, not just one thing is prioritized over the other, but it's all interconnected, everything is holistic, and the upliftment of a city can be done through sustainability and by living by the key concepts of it.
Definitely, I fully agree with that. And what you're saying about, sustainability and the environment, thing, like you said, that we don't really look at from that sort of, I guess, maybe logical point of view. Like, we are living off the land, and so if our environment and our land is degraded and it's not being able to sustain itself, then how are we going to be able to live? Because we are relying on that resource. And so you did also mention about how in South Africa anyway, sustainability or the environment is kind of swept under the rug, and we may have policies, but they may not necessarily directly combat or directly address the issue of sustainability and environmentalism. And so in your academic and your practical experience, how successful do you think South Africa has been in achieving the sustainable agenda? And, what has really either supported or halted the sustainability agenda that we kind of ascribe to and we have kind of agreed to implement?
So I think taking it from like a practical experience, I do believe that South Africa has somewhat prioritized sustainable development in policies and in city agendas, but it is dependent on the perspective that you are looking at it from. Is it environmental, economic, or social? As each of them, have different agendas, people and in government and government officials and institutions prioritize a specific kind of sustainability. And I think that is very important to understand. What kind of sustainability are they prioritizing in the agendas and mandates? However, the development of sustainable cities and the ideals have started manifesting in South Africa, with the South African Cities Network focusing on 4 variables, which include water management, climate change, sustainable energy, and waste management, to project future sustainable city developments within the country and how they can prioritize sustainability in an integrative and a holistic manner. Drawing an example from my master's research that focused on environmental legislation, renewable energy, and wildlife protection and conservation, I realized that although South Africa has numerous legislation or environmental legislation and assessments that are supposed to protect what the emerging industry of renewable energy, specifically wind energy, because this is what I focused on in my research, South Africa legislation does not really offer a distinctive approach in achieving proper protection for our wild. So legislation offers a broad overview of what should be, but not of how it should be. In understanding that renewable energy is still a relatively new concept and industry, the wind energy industry in South Africa is roughly about 10 years old. There is a bit of leniency, but it is an important area where a lot of further research is needed, and it is pertinent that existing environmental legislation be reviewed and updated to be incorporative of this emerging and important sector, as it does impact our wildlife greatly. And South Africa does have a vast and diverse wildlife system. So much so that South Africa has been viewed as in 2020 as the best country in the world with regards to its wildlife and its environmental protection and conservation. So the problem therefore comes in when this is viewed as not always being entirely an important issue, when you have issues such as exponential growth of unemployment next to it. So it's the level of priorities and prioritization that distinguishes the magnitude of sustainable development that can be achieved. You can't focus on sustainable economic development, but not on the environmental side of it. And that is something that is still occurring, especially in developing countries. One aspect is being prioritized over the other. It is not being done in a coherent manner. And this is the downfall. So the sustainability agenda is there within South Africa and within developing countries, but it's all of these other aspects and factors, such as unemployment, such as the housing issues, that makes it come to the forefront about what is our priorities. But I see it as a sense where by prioritizing housing, you can also incorporate the environment, and you shooting down to a bird with two, what's it? You're shooting down two birds with one
Two
stone.
birds with one stone. Yeah.
So it's that kind of prioritization that becomes important. And I don't think that governments are necessarily doing that especially within developing countries.
I agree with that. And I think it's also just about in our context. I know, sustainability is, I think when we try and implement sustainability in South Africa, we look a lot to, the global north and more developed areas who maybe don't have these challenges that we have, like mass unemployment, housing issues, etc. And so their problems or how they have to view sustainability is not as complex as how we have to view it. And like you said, when we are doing things such as housing and housing developments, we need to be smart and strategic and also creative with how we are then also it's sustainability of the social sustainability, but we also need to make sure that whatever we are building or constructing is also environmentally sustainable. And so obviously you come from more of the environmental side of sustainability. If we look at sustainability in terms of the three aspects of environment, social and economic. And so just to bring it back into the whole theme of my podcast and what this episode is about, do you believe that incorporating Indigenous knowledge systems, and Indigenous knowledge systems would be a form of ethnographic knowledge, which is the theme of the series, and so do you think this knowledge system, this local knowledge system, and thinking in these ways is an important and strategic approach to sustainable planning that we could potentially incorporate when we are in our mission to create sustainable development?
There is definitely merit, because in the dawn of civilization, people coexisted and understood the environment in which they lived. Currently, the indigenous community comprises of only 5% of the world's population, but these communities ultimately manage 28% of the world's land surfaces and are considered to be the guardians of 80% of global diversity. And this becomes so this is also there because indigenous communities become one with the environment. They understand the diversifying effects of what the environment provides for them and the multiple ways that a singular object could be used as or used in. So as an example, plants can be used as herbal remedies. They can be used as clothes, as cooking equipment, as food. It is the indigenous person and the ability to connect with nature that has led the current culinary world to be so diverse with ingredients and spices, because they took the time to understand the environment in which they lived in and how different objects could be used. Same as within medicine. It is being identified presently that more people will try herbal and traditional remedies first when they get sick, instead of consuming medicine that has all of these ingredients which we don't necessarily understand what they are. And whilst they make you better, they also harm the body in different ways. So by coexisting, they created this balance between need and want and what could be done and in what time it could be done in order to survive. That is why many indigenous tribes praise nature and see it as a deity, because it constantly provided for them with the only expectation in return is for them to protect it and not to exploit it. So this is essentially being sustainable, and this is how sustainability came about in those times already, because the balance is created between the environment, economy, and social sphere within their communities. Cities today have developed in regions and localities where historical cities used to be, and this is in biodiversity hotspots. This is why indigenous urbanization has become so important and has been proposed to be enveloped into modern planning systems, because it is an underutilized resource. It presents opportunities for traditional forms of land use, ecosystem management, and occupation of space to evolve into a source of new and creative ways for urban design and to achieve sustainable urbanization at a time cities around the world are facing the loss of their biodiversity. Many of these indigenous people and local communities have cultivated and used biological diversity in a sustainable way for thousands of years. Some of their practices have even been proven to enhance and promote biodiversity at the local level and aid in maintaining healthy ecosystems. So if you have to look at an example, I'll use the example of the Aztec Empire and the main city at the time, which is now located centrally in Mexico City. Looking at it from like an architectural perspective, one can be deeply astonished at what they could accomplish at that time in history, where modern machinery did not exist. The city at that time had over 2,000 inhabitants, but the city had two double aqueducts made from terracotta. And terracotta is a clay-based substance actually used presently for ceramic roof tiles. And they used this and they made these aqueducts that provided the city with fresh water from the surrounding springs, providing water for cleaning and washing. And the infrastructural canals that they built provided infrastructure for sanitation. And this becomes amazing as they even recycle the organic waste for cultivation and dispose of other waste in a sustainable. And contemporary Mexico City is currently beginning to imitate this practice of recycling waste for fertilization. So they now bringing this very old practice that was used thousands of years ago. They bring that practice back because they've realized it's sustainable. It's it can be used to benefit not only them but for the environment as well. So these people have used what was in the environment to build a functioning city that had sanitary and freshwater infrastructure. How can we not note the manner in which they lived? Because they built a functioning city for a large group of people. But at the end of the day, they still protected nature and the surrounding environment. So at the same time, indigenous knowledge is being used in agricultural production and farming presently in Nigeria, and has seen that these farmers, although not all of them are literate, and if they are there, it's very basic, have greater agricultural outputs and earn a lot more than the national minimum wage in Nigeria. And this all comes from lessons being taught through the generations. Whilst they might not be using modern machinery, they're still earning an income in a sustainable manner through sustainable practices that benefit them and the environment. And this is what indigenous knowledge has allowed Western knowledge that has been perceived as being great to actually show that people who work and live with the land know and understand the land better. They have shared their knowledge and have greatly contributed to the expansion and use of sustainable practices in agriculture, healthcare, food security, education, and natural resource management. So how can we not look at indigenous communities and indigenous knowledge and not take their practices into urban planning? We are trying to create an environment and a city that is holistic and integrative for everyone, not just one perspective. So it has become, and it should continue to be, a very important knowledge base in which urban planning should continue to pull lessons out of, because that is the way that planning should go, and that is, I believe, the only way that the sustainability agenda can be fully achieved and incorporated into the planning of cities and systems.
Well, thank you so much, Nadeemah, for joining us today and for sharing your knowledge and engaging on this very important topic of sustainability, but also emphasizing how looking back and reflecting on Indigenous knowledge systems and Indigenous ways of living can actually be how we can enhance and achieve this, holistic sustainability, and not just focusing on social and economic sustainability, but also actively promoting environmental sustainability and the idea of cohesive living.
Thank you for having me, Inéz.